Did you know that every country strives to increase the growth of its national output, GDP, because it represents very important factors in the economic sector, including the tourism industry? The tourism industry is so important for the countries in the Asean region because most of them are endowed with natural wonders, unique landscape, magnificent places and a rich biodiversity. The growth rate of the Asean tourism in the last several years, pre-pandemic period, has been in an increasing trend, and it always had been very high. As per the UN World Tourism Organization record, the Asean region was the most visited by international tourists in the whole Asia-Pacific region. Had the growth rate been sustained, its tourism receipts could have contributed to several billions of dollars to the region's economic growth. To some extent, a country's GDP is reliant on tourism receipts. The higher the country's international tourism receipt, the higher its GDP. In other words, the changing of GDP in ASEAN countries can be predicted by knowing the tourism indicator. Hence, governments of the ASEAN countries often set their policies to achieve an increased GDP based on the indications of international tourist arrival (I.T.A.) and international tourism receipt (I.T.R.). For example, if Thailand projects a 5% GDP for 2023 from 4.5% the year before, Thailand has to set for a higher I.T.A. that would translate to a higher I.T.R. To do this, you need to take a closer look at what the Philippines has been doing somewhat successfully, as an example. Because, the fact is, although its I.T.A. is the lowest amongst the 6 biggest ASEAN economies, it trumps 4 of those on a per capita basis. And, this is partly due to the Filipinos' intelligent strategy of swaying international tourists to extend their vacation and splurge their money on services, such as medical tourism, island hopping and cultural immersion programs, to name a few. What does international tourism arrival, or I.T.A., means? It simply means the number of international tourists that visited in a country. For example, the year before the COVID pandemic took place in 2019, Thailand registered 39.1 million international tourist arrival (I.T.A.). However, the following year, 2020, its I.T.A. has plunged to 6.7 million. But if you remember, it was the year that the global lockdown took a full swing effect. What about international tourism receipt? What does I.T.R. mean? International Tourism Receipt, or I.T.R., is the expenditure of international inbound visitors including their payments to national carriers for international transport. For example, the costs of the airplane ticket purchased by a Filipino flying to Singapore for a 3-day trip is registered under I.T.R. And, by definition, it also includes any other prepayments made for goods, services received in the destination country. For example, a Malaysian tourist booking for a hotel in Cebu, Philippines. In this case, the tourism receipt will be recorded for the Philippines data. Now, here's the thing. International tourism arrival (I.T.A.) is often criticized when it exceeds to a certain limit. Too much tourist arrival could ruin the fun, as it creates unnecessary congestion. It also often is a big source of pollution as more trashes are dumped in every spots they visit, and as a result, ruins the environment and the whole ecosystem in general. This is often the problem at many places in Japan, where Chinese tourists flock in droves, often creating problems such as privacy, noise pollution, cleanliness, environmental balance, safety and so on. However, as mentioned earlier, a high international tourism arrival could translate to a higher income for a country, which would then drive for a higher GDP. Now the question is, which is a better indicator between a higher I.T.A. and a higher I.T.R.? The answer to that question is simple. A high I.T.R. or international tourism receipt. It's a no-brainer that a country's end goal is to earn more so that it would have adequate funds to pump its economic development. The proceeds that the government will receive from I.T.R. can help a government becomes cash rich. It will make a government able to afford to carry out its infrastructure, health, education and research programs. And when it comes to international tourism receipt, or I.T.R., it was Thailand who performed the strongest, both in terms of aggregate I.T.R. amount, and on an I.T.R. per capita basis. In 2019, it registered an I.T.R. of $64.3 billion. Thailand was followed by Malaysia with $22.2 billion, then Singapore with $20.4 billion. And, the last spot amongst the 6 richest ASEAN economies was the Philippines with $11.4 billion. But, hey, wait. Don't come into a conclusion yet. Take a closer look at the table below. Thailand $64.3 billion. Malaysia $22.2 billion US dollars. Singapore $20.4 billion US dollars. Indonesia $18.4 billion US dollars. Vietnam $11.8 billion US dollars. Philippines $11.4 billion US dollars. If you're an excessive compulsive type person, unintelligent, or someone who does not think critically, or who doesn't scrutinize thoroughly in order to learn and understand the facts behind the numbers presented at you, you'd suddenly drive into a conclusion. And you'd conclude that the Philippines did poorly in this regard, as it did in other rankings. And then more bashing of the Philippines comes right after, and another war erupts. Okay, we'll tell you this. If you're talking about an aggregate gross number, it would really appear that way. It would appear the Philippines lag behind its peers. But did it really? Let's scrutinize the data, and dissect those numbers. Let's see who's actually winning in the race when it comes to I.T.A on a per capita basis. Let's find out and rank these 6 biggest ASEAN economies based on how much did each tourist has spent at each of these 6 countries. Now, let's run the numbers, and start with Vietnam, 18 million I.T.A, and $11.8 billion US dollars of I.T.A. Therefore, its I.T.A per capita, pre-pandemic time, stood at $655 US dollars only. In contrast, let's compare it to the Philippines. 8.26 million I.T.A, and $11.4 billion US dollars of I.T.A. Therefore, its I.T.A on a per capita basis was $1,380 US dollars. An amount significantly higher than of Vietnam's, which had more than twice as many I.T.A than the Philippines. Perhaps Vietnam did not capitalize on its natural wonders and amazing services to convert its high I.T.A to high I.T.A, like the Philippines and Thailand did. As you can see, if we would rank the 6 biggest ASEAN economies I.T.A on a per capita basis, the Philippines wouldn't pale in comparison to its peers. Here's the ranking league table. Take a look at the numbers. First, Thailand. Second, the Philippines. Third, Indonesia. Fourth, Singapore. Fifth, Malaysia. And, 6th, Vietnam. As you can see, it's the Philippines that's competing with Thailand. They're the rivals in this regard. The 2 countries are neck and neck in this ranking. Thailand with $1,644 US dollars and the Philippines with $1,380 US dollars. Malaysia is far down at number 5. And Vietnam's I.T.A wasn't even half the amount of the Philippines. Meaning, for every tourist that visits the Philippines, Malaysia would need close to 2 tourists I.T.A to equal that of the Philippines' I.T.A. In other words, for the Philippines to beat Malaysia's gross I.T.A figure, it only needs to double its I.T.A. Why is this significant? Because too much tourism is damaging. Yes, it does create jobs for a lot of people. It can improve the country's infrastructure. But comes with the incommensurate tourism influx, or the excessive proceeding of such, can also lead to a severe damage of the ecosystem and devastation of the environment and its natural beauty. When you have a good control over your I.T.A, you don't have to pack your country with several millions of tourists. And, more importantly, you can reserve ample spaces for your own citizens to enjoy their own country. Lastly, the Philippines isn't as bad as what some of those overly delusional and fanatics would put it out to be. The Philippines sees tourism as important. It tries to attract international tourists. It welcomes them with great smiles and wide open arms. But its government also knows the statistics it's targeting, so it would not have a repeat of the so-called Boracay cleanup and Manila Bay rehabilitation program, which ended up costlier in the end. Mabuhay Philippines. Mabuhay ASEAN. Mabuhay world.